In this video, we're going to show you how to plan and install a transom over an opening in your home. You'll see a short video that explains how transoms fit over the opening, and then we'll show you how to set the width of the transom to match your opening. We'll determine the height above the floor to place the transom and how tall of an opening you'll need to fit the transom. And then we'll talk about the size of the jamb. We've helped thousands of people do this, homeowners and contractors, so don't feel intimidated. All parts of this video are taken from the planning section of our website, where we have videos on many types of installations. At Transoms Direct, we build custom-sized windows to fit your opening. In this case, we can even enclose the opening a bit further with flankers and side lights to create a truly unique look. We call these combination units. But first, let's get started installing just a transom over this opening. This video is oriented around starting with a rough opening. If your starting point is a cased opening or a drywalled opening, check out the planning section of our website. We already have a video series built just for you. Hi, this is John with Transoms Direct. Today we'll discuss how to install a transom sash like this one above an opening for a completed installation like you see behind me now. Whether you're building a new home or doing a renovation, every transom installation has a starting point. If you visit the planning section of our website, you can identify your starting point and then receive step-by-step instructional videos tailored to find the measurements for your project. Today, we'll discuss starting with a rough opening. Rough openings have exposed studs with unfinished drywall edges along the perimeter of the opening. We framed our opening using the instructions from the planning videos to accommodate a 60-inch long transom sash like you see me holding here. But if you're doing a renovation and have a legacy opening, the planning section will show you how to order a transom that fits the opening you already have. As you can see, this thinner transom sash will need to be placed into a jamb to match the thicker wall of our rough opening. Once the sash is placed into a jamb, we refer to it as a transom unit. To install our transom unit at the top of our rough opening, we also need to fabricate a jamb for the opening below the transom unit. We call this simple three-piece jamb a U-jamb, because when it's built, it looks like an upside-down U. We have a separate video on sizing and building a U-jamb that we will link in the description below. Once the U-jamb is built, you slide it into the rough opening, flush with the faces of the drywall on each side. Check to see that the U-jamb is square, plumb, and level, and secure it in place with shims, just like you're installing a door. When your transom unit arrives from the factory, place it into the opening directly over the top of the U-jamb. Be sure that the faces of the U-jamb and the transom jamb are flush and that the side jambs are in alignment. Then you can secure the transom unit to the U-jamb with a few nails. At this point, the transom is installed and you are ready to trim out the opening. The last step is to cover the seam between the transom and U-jamb. We recommend a piece of 1 1/8 inch mullion. Cut the mullion to match the distance between the casing legs and secure it with a few nails. That's it. You've installed a transom over an opening. At Transoms Direct, our basic product is a transom sash that you order with specific dimensions, width, and height. You've decided to install a transom into a rough opening, either a 4-sided rough opening like this or a 3-sided opening like this one. To facilitate this installation, a jamb will be attached around the outside edge of the transom sash so that the sash unit may be mounted into the rough opening. The jamb serves as a sort of adapter between the thinner transom sash and the thicker wall. When you add a jamb to your sash, you now have a transom unit that is slightly larger in height and width than the dimensions of the sash you ordered. Jambs are made of 1x material, and 1x material is exactly 3/4 inches thick. Since the jamb forms a perimeter all the way around the transom sash, the jamb adds an additional 3/4 of an inch along each edge of the transom sash, left, right, top, and bottom. Cumulatively, you end up with a transom unit for installation that is 1 1/2 inch wider and 1 1/2 inch taller than the sash size you order. Most customers do have us add a jamb to their transom sash before it leaves our factory. We consider such transom units with a jamb ready to install. Now, let's relate this discussion back to your rough opening and the width that you will choose for the transom sash that you order. We recommend that you order a transom sash that is 2 inches narrower in width than the rough opening that you've already built, or that you build a rough opening that is 2 inches wider than the transom sash you plan to use. We call this the 2-inch rule. Let's look at some examples. If you have a 66-inch wide rough opening already built, you would order a transom sash that is 2 inches narrower, or 64 inches. Conversely, if you plan on installing a 64-inch transom into a wall, you would build a rough opening that measures 66 inches wide, or 2 inches larger in width. This 2-inch difference in width between the rough opening and the sash easily accommodates the 1 1/2 inch width added by the jamb, leaving 1/2 inch left over that can be split evenly among equal-sized gaps on each side of the transom unit as it fits into the opening. This extra room allows us some flexibility in installation to ensure that the transom unit is set plumb, square, and level into the opening. In our next video, we'll consider the height of the transom sash to order, exploring how this same 2-inch rule applies for the height of rough openings in a different context. You're planning to set a transom over the top of an opening using a rough opening for installation. Let's determine the height of the transom sash that you should order. To do this, we must first plan for the opening underneath the transom, which is something that we call the U-jamb. So let's see how this works out. Our goal in planning for the opening below the transom is to have the top of the opening match the normal opening height of a door. This way, both the door and the opening will line up properly if they can be seen in the same room. The standard inside height of a door jamb measures 81 inches above a finished floor. Accordingly, we want the inside height of our walk-through opening to be 81 inches as well. Having established that 81 inches is a good height for the opening, let's talk about the U-jamb that we'll need to build to form its lower opening. Whereas you can order a transom sash from us as a transom unit with the jamb already installed, you will need to build the U-jamb out of 1x material on your own. Later, you can watch our video on building the U-jamb and installing it into the rough opening. For now, just know that the bottom of the U-jamb legs will be set directly atop the finished floor and rise 81 3/4 inches into the rough opening. But please note the following two important details. First, the top of the U-jamb is where the transom unit will be placed. The top of the U-jamb will be at 81 3/4 inch inside the rough opening. The clear height below the U-jamb to the finished floor will still be 81 inches. The difference is the 3/4 inch piece of 1x material that comprises the jamb. Second, if you're in an earlier stage of construction and have unfinished floors, raise the U-jamb 1/2 inch above the unfinished floor or otherwise adjust for the finished floor height. Remember to account for raising the U-jamb in your planning, since the top of the U-jamb will now be higher than 81 3/4 inches. As you can see, between the top of the U-jamb and the top of the rough opening, space exists into which the transom unit can be placed. Measure or calculate the height of this opening and order a transom sash that is 2 inches shorter than this opening created above the U-jamb. A properly sized transom sash with a jamb installed will leave a gap of approximately 1/2 inch above the transom unit, once it's placed directly atop the U-jamb. So now you should know how to determine the width and height of the transom sash that you will order. In the next video, you'll determine the jamb depth that you need for your installation based on your wall thickness. This jamb depth will apply to both the jamb that you order for your transom sash, as well as the U-jamb that you build for your opening. After you've planned your rough opening and finalized the dimensions of your transom sash, it's time to size the depth of your jamb. Since the jamb is a sort of adapter that fits the thinner transom sash into your thicker wall, the jamb must be sized to fit your exact situation. Jambs only have one measurement that changes, the jamb depth. The jamb depth that you order should be equal to the thickness of the wall where you plan to install the transom. There are two ways of determining your wall thickness. One, by physically measuring, or two, by adding up the thickness of the wall's materials. Think of your wall as a sandwich, which we call a wall assembly. The pieces of the bread on the outside of the sandwich are the wall sheathing. In the middle of the sandwich is a framing member, which is often a 2x4 or 2x6 wall stud. When all pieces of the sandwich are in place, you have a wall assembly. If your rough opening is already built with the wall sheathing attached, use a tape measure to determine the wall thickness by measuring the outside to outside dimension between the opposite sides of the wall sheathing. This example shows a sandwich of a 1/2 inch drywall and 2x4 stud wall measuring 4.5 inches thick. This is a common wall assembly which corresponds to a common jamb depth of 4 9/16 inches. The jamb depth that you order should always be equal to or slightly larger than the actual thickness of your wall assembly. If you're building a brand new wall, you can also add up the thicknesses of the various wall components to determine your jamb depth without measuring. But beware, walls made of plaster or fire-rated materials or walls in colder climates or urban settings often have non-standard wall thicknesses. Either carefully research the actual thicknesses of each wall component or measure the actual as-built wall thickness when complete to be sure that you're ordering the correct depth for your jamb. If your wall is already built, consider using a hole saw to drill a small hole clear through the wall at the place in the wall where the transom will be installed. Place a tape measure into the hole and hook it on the opposite side of the wall to determine the actual thickness of the wall assembly. If you're remodeling a finished home, look for a door or a cased opening that exists along the same wall as where you're planning on installing your transom. You can carefully measure the jamb of these openings to obtain the wall thickness. For a door, go to the hinge side and measure to the edges of the jamb on each side of the doorstop, being careful not to include any casing along either edge. For a cased opening, measure to the edges of the flat jamb on the interior side of the opening. Again, be careful not to include in your measurement any casing that abuts the edge of the jamb. Coincidentally, the door jamb and cased opening shown in these examples both measure exactly 4 9/16 of an inch, which corresponds to the proper common jamb depth for the 1/2 inch drywall and 2x4 wall assembly that we saw in our previous example. To summarize, always order a jamb that is equal to or slightly thicker than your actual wall measurement. If you decide to calculate your wall thickness by adding the components in your wall assembly, add 1/16 inch to the sum of the wall components. A jamb that's slightly deeper than your finished wall assembly will not be noticeable after final installation.